Rolling along here on Newhouse Afternoon. Max Gifford, Dylan Byer, Nico Horning, glad to be with you this afternoon. And it's time for part dukes of our special guest doubleheader. And now we bring on Kenny Albert, the only sportscaster calling games in all four professional and for all major professional sports with the NHL, the NFL, MLB, NBA. Kenny, thanks so much for taking the time. We really appreciate you hopping on to join us. I'll start here, though, because, everyone's attention normally goes to the four major sports you call. But one of the coolest things I think that you got to do this summer was call water polo. And I think, you almost have two reactions because you're calling all these major professional sports. You go, how is Kenny Albert calling water polo? But then when you're listening to the water polo games, you go, oh, my gosh, Kenny Albert's calling water polo. This is great.
Well, first of all, I appreciate you having me on. Great to be with you guys. Water polo was a lot of fun. It was a new sport for me. As you mentioned, I'm heavily involved in the four major sports, football and hockey for the most part, and then some basketball, some baseball throughout the year. But I have been assigned in past Olympics to work some other sports, track and field, volleyball, and in this case, this past summer, water polo, a sport that I didn't really know much about, but spent a lot of time studying and learning, and I had some great partners around me. We were calling it off monitors up in Stamford, Connecticut, so it was a little different than being at the Olympics in person in Paris, but it was a lot of fun, and I was so glad that I had the opportunity to add another sport to my list.
So now that you're years into your career, obviously, and you've done it all, what's the drive at this point to kind of keep it going? I know it was a dream for you. We got the book right here. But what does it feel like to be in the moment now versus maybe earlier on in your career when you're still doing everything?
Well, I think the key is I never feel like I'm going to work. Yes, there's a lot of work and a lot of travel involved, especially this time of the year when I'm involved in three sports that overlap. Last week, for example, I called a basketball game on Friday, a football game on Sunday, hockey earlier in the week. I have 3 hockey games this week, football game on the weekend. So there's a lot of preparation involved. You have to be really organized. I have a checklist that I go through before each and every game that involves watching prior games, doing a lot of reading, preparing charts, going through statistics and many other materials, going to coach press conferences, meeting with players and coaches. So there's a lot that goes into it, but there's really nothing else I would rather be doing. It's so much fun to be able to go and call games at the various venues, throughout North America. Just last week, I had games at Madison Square Garden, an Avalanche game at Ball Arena in Denver, Knicks game at MSG, a football game in New Orleans, hockey game in Philadelphia tomorrow. I have the Detroit Lions, one of the top teams in the NFL, this Sunday, so it never really gets old.
That's awesome. Well, the first sentence I think in your introduction was, "I've never worked a day in my life," and I think that was such a cool beginning to the book.
Yeah, I was going to say, I have been lucky enough to read the book. I was going to, Nico, you got to put it out front, the product placement here. This is Kenny's book, A Mic for All Seasons. Just came out a little while ago, Kenny. For me, it was a fantastic read because it drew on all your experiences doing all these different sports. But I think one of the things that kind of stood out was sort of the beginning of your career and the fact that not many people probably know you worked in the American Hockey League with the Baltimore Skipjacks, and then obviously working up to the Rangers and doing all these major professional sports. I guess, a question we like to ask a lot of guests on this show, if you could go back to, a time when you were really young, you were calling Skipjacks games. I mean, what advice would you give to your, I guess, your former self at this time?
Right. Great question. Really would not have done anything differently. I was so fortunate to get hired by the Skipjacks back in 1990. I was just out of college, and my goal was to do hockey play-by-play on the radio. And I was hired by a minor league team at the highest level of the minor leagues in a big city, Baltimore. And I was hired primarily to do the radio broadcast, but also to chip in so many other areas: public relations, marketing, sales, go pick up a player at the airport, really whatever they needed. But I learned so much about what it took to run a professional sports franchise, and got to do the 82 games a season, getting the reps on play-by-play, many of the games with color analysts, and many I worked solo. So those were 2 years that I would not have traded in for anything. And the advice that I give to a lot of young broadcasters, high school, college students like yourself, and there's a chapter in the book titled Paying It Forward because I do love talking to young broadcasters and giving advice. And I always tell people, do as much as you can, even if it's not the exact area that you hope to get into, whether it's play-by-play, color, sideline reporting, studio host, interviews like what you guys are doing, even behind the scenes, working as a producer, a director, a statistician. The more experience you get, the better, whether it's an internship, a job at a college radio station, college TV station, etc. There are so many more opportunities out there now than when I was your age. The internet didn't even exist, believe it or not, when I was in college. So and you, my friends and I who worked in the sports department at the radio station, we had a fight for airtime with the music department, with the DJs. These days, you can go broadcast a game and put it out there on the web. So if you're passionate about it, and I'm sure all of you are, about working in this business, and you guys are all off to a great start doing what you're doing at one of the best schools in the nation as far as journalism and broadcasting. If you know where to look, whether it's for an internship or any other area that you're able to gain experience, I think you're ahead of the game.
So often we ask our role models who their role models were, and your dad, the great Marv Albert, was the voice of basketball, the voice of the New York Knicks. Growing up with Marv as your dad, how did he inspire you, and what have you taken from the way he broadcasted games to your own broadcasts?
Well, first of all, it was great. Such a tremendous childhood. Growing up in my household with my parents and two uncles who were also broadcasters, Al and Steve. So I always joke that whenever they came over on a holiday or special occasion, I felt like I was listening to the first all sports radio station. I would just try to learn via osmosis. Couldn't have asked for better teachers. And I didn't really know anything differently. He was my father. They were my uncles. I grew up going to games and tagging along, and when I was old enough, I would start keeping stats for him. So just the knowledge that I was able to soak in, and when I started keeping stats for him at 15 or 16 years old, just having the experience of sitting in the broadcast booth, listening to the communication between the announcers and the production truck, it was just invaluable. I felt like I had such a head start on anybody else my age who might not be able to get experience until they went off to college.
Kenny Albert here with us on Newhouse Afternoon with Max Gifford, Dylan Beyer. I'm Nico Horning. We'll step aside for just a couple of minutes and be back to wrap things up here on Newhouse Afternoon. Stick with us. Kenny will be back here in just a minute.
Saturday,
Sweet. So Kenny, I know a couple of minutes ago you brought up a checklist that you go through before each game. What does that look like? Are there some commonalities between each of the sports, or is there some things that differ between each sport that you're preparing for?
It's pretty similar. To be honest, I have it right here on the phone. I'll pull it up. So,
sweet.
So the football checklist, the first time I have a team every year, there's a little more that goes into it. Once you have a team repeat times, you've done some of the work already. So I go through each team's media guide. You're not reading every word, but you're kind of scanning through, looking for notes on each player. I go through each team's weekly press release that they send out. I read the newspaper clips every day from both cities for about a week leading up to the game. I watch the last game, go through the stats that the league sends out. I go through my own files, which I have here, where I clip articles. And I also take out my past charts from the previous time that I had that team. So I have Detroit Indy this week, so it's not nearly complete, but I started last night putting my charts together. So that's the Indianapolis offense, Indianapolis defense, and then Detroit on the other side. And I go through the depth chart, put the players in at their positions, and then I haven't had either team this year, so I went back to last year, my personal charts from when I had these teams, and transferred some of the information over, and then I'll add everything else in during the week with all the new info. This is also not complete, but this is for tonight's hockey game, Rangers Canucks. So it's pretty similar.
Nice.
Not as much prep for hockey because the teams are playing all the time. You're seeing a lot of their games. I know the Rangers so well. having worked not all their games this year, but a lot of them. For football, Detroit and Indy, I haven't done either team this year, so there's a lot more prep that goes into it.
So you're a proponent of handwriting every one of your charts, it looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. I know a lot of people do it on the computer, and I do a lot on the computer and on the iPad, research-wise. But as far as these charts, I just think you remember it so much more if you write it down. I hate hearing about people that farm it out and use a service to do theirs because it's like cheating. You're not doing your own work.
Right.
They can make mistakes, right? You're relying on somebody else to be perfect. At least if you make a mistake, it's your mistake. But I just think you remember so much more when you write it down, whether it's the name, number, stats, notes about the players. So I'm a big proponent of that. But not that I don't like technology. I do a lot with technology.
Yeah, right.
So I'm not totally old school.
Well, speaking of mistakes, I mean, I've heard from Mike Breen, he's never had a perfect broadcast. What is there a mistake that you ever made on a broadcast that has stuck with you and you're like, ooh, that one was kind of...
I mean, you're always your own toughest critic, so you're never going to be perfect, right? It's a 2 or 3 hour live telecast every time you're on the air, so you might misidentify a player or give some wrong information, and it kills you. I'll go, walk away from a game so upset if I made, I can't think of one specifically, but a mistake about a rule or about some historical fact. You wind up forgetting about it pretty quickly, but it does kill you once you realize it. So you strive for perfection, but again, it's a live broadcast, so you're never going to be perfect. I've had a couple of funny things, like I got the hiccups on the air one time, trying to reach for the cough button. You feel the hiccup coming. I wrote about a couple of them in the book. I can't remember specifics, but a couple of things like that with hiccups or misspeaking about something. A lot of times if you make some kind of a mistake, if you realize it right away and correct it, I think the viewer appreciates that, right? Instead of just leaving it out there. It shows you're human almost.
For sure.
Not just a computer, right? Exactly. We're not AI. We're not AI up in the booth. So there are going to be mistakes sometimes.
.com. Tomorrow's broadcasting stars today. Broadcasting live from the campus of Syracuse University. This is Newhouse Afternoon.
Welcome back to Newhouse Afternoon. Wrapping up shop with Kenny Albert joining us here ahead of his busy broadcast this weekend. Usually we say, one broadcast, but it's broadcast plural with Kenny Albert.
It's always broadcast.
Max Gifford, Dylan Beyer, and I'm Nico Horning here with you. Kenny, I know we've talked about the book a little bit. As far as the future of sports broadcasting, and obviously we're college students ourselves trying to crack into this in the future, where do you see things going, whether it's TV, streaming, radio, and maybe play-by-play opportunities and sports talk radio? Where do you see it all going in the next several years?
Well, I think the great thing about sports, Nico, is it's the best reality TV, right? Live games, you never know what's going to happen. So I think there's always going to be the need for broadcasts, right? Play-by-play announcers, color analysts, hosts. Sports talk has exploded, obviously, over the last 30 years. WFAN in New York was the first all-sports radio station in 1987. Just think, how many thousands and thousands and millions of jobs have been created in the world of sports broadcasting since WFAN came on the air that first day. Podcasts, various types of shows on the internet, on streaming services. It's not going away because sports are just as popular as they've ever been. And you see the rights fees going up with all of the sports leagues. So for the three of you, just keep on doing what you're doing. And I know we'll be seeing you along the way and hopefully sharing a broadcast booth with you someday.
Kenny, that really means a lot, and again, we really appreciate you joining us. I'm kind of a dinosaur of the group because I'm still a huge avid reader. It's the reason I read your book. I still get the hard copies of the book. I'm not a huge, audio book guy. I'm not a huge, read it off your phone. So I guess as the avid reader of the group, I have to ask, even though you just called your 500th game at Fox a little while ago, and you still sound so good in every broadcast you do. I mean, could we potentially be getting a sequel of the Kenny Albert book?
Well, I appreciate it, Max. It was a lot of fun writing it. Mike for All Seasons. It was published about a year ago and really started it during the pandemic, and felt like I had a lot of stories to tell from my birth when I was 3 months premature, 1 pound, 15 ounces, spent 2.5 months in the hospital, on to my days learning from family members, and then a big break in high school when I started doing games for Cox Cable on Long Island. They happened to show up at my high school to film a girls' basketball game, and I volunteered to announce the game and wound up working the next 2.5 years for them. And then the college days, Baltimore Skipjacks, and then on to the professional career. So I've started to keep a list in my phone of potential stories that I would want to include in the sequel. I'm not sure that I'll have enough material for about 10 years, but you never know down the line. Hopefully I'll have the opportunity to write another book, but I appreciate you reading it. And I think for your viewers and listeners, it can be used as sort of a textbook for high school and college students who would like to get into broadcasting. I tell a lot of stories about the various analysts I've worked with, the different sports that I've been involved in, stories about travel and some crazy situations that I've been in, a chapter about the COVID years and how we did broadcast during that time, and then the chapter paying it forward, like I mentioned. So, again, appreciate that you read it, but I really think that college students, in particular those involved and interested in broadcasting, can hopefully get a lot out of it.
Speaking of moments, I know you've written a lot of stories in the book, but you've called a lot of games. Are there a couple moments that really stand out to you that you had to call? Personally, one of my favorite calls is your Jose Bautista home run, no doubt about it, and then you let the crowd speak. And that was in an age where I was really curious with the voice of sport. What stands out to you with the minute left that we have here in the show?
It's ironic. I've done probably fewer baseball games than definitely than the other three sports. It's probably on par with basketball, but that's the call that I get asked about the most often, the Bautista home run bat flip back in 2015. There are so many calls in hockey. The Rangers winning the Cup in '94, I was on the call for NHL radio. 2 of the last 3 years working the Stanley Cup on the TV side, Olympic hockey, gold medal games. In football, too many to go through here in the time that we have. A lot of them are written about in the book. One that stands out just 2 years ago, the crazy laterals at the end of the New England-Las Vegas game and the Chandler Jones interception turned for a touchdown with no time on the clock. But, just so fortunate to be involved in as many sports as I have been through the years, and it's led to a lot of certainly memorable moments.
Well, Kenny, we appreciate you jumping on here, and good luck the rest of the way. Good luck tonight with the call, and we'll be talking soon.
Well, I really appreciate you having me on. Dylan, Nico, Max, good luck in your careers. Hopefully we can do this again. And
thank you, Kenny.
Stay in touch and really enjoyed our chat.
Will do. Thanks,
Great.
Kenny. Best of luck going forward. This hour of Newhouse Afternoon powered by Drivers Village Cicero. Go to dvoffers.com for more info. Well, that wraps it up. For Max Gifford, Dylan Beyer, I'm Nico Horning here on our last Newhouse Afternoon show. We'll be back at some point in the future. Thanks so much.